right. Hi, I'm Michelle Garcia Winner, and this is my father, Max Garcia, who is a Holocaust survivor. He survived 5 different camps over the course of about 2 years, and I'm going to interview him today to let him tell you part of his story because we have such a short period of time. As an adult, once my dad survived the camps, he ended up getting sponsored by the United States Army to come to the United States and continue to help. At the end of the war, when he was liberated, he was helping the government, the U.S. government in Europe as a translator, as they tried to figure out how, once everything was so crazy, after all, everybody was liberated and figuring out what to do. The U.S. government was still quite helpful in Europe. So my dad served as a translator. And then they sponsored him to the United States, where he ended up living ultimately in San Francisco, California. He always wanted to become an architect, which he did ultimately get to do. And he ran his own company for many, many years. And he had 3 children, myself and my older brother, David, and my sister, Tanya. And then my dad retired, and he has now been retired 34 years. And you've been retired from work 34 years. And you are currently how old?
19, I'm currently 94, going on for 95 in June.
Quite quickly coming up. And so my dad grew up started as a child in Amsterdam, Holland, and he lived with his family between Amsterdam and Antwerp in the course of his childhood when they returned back to Amsterdam when he was about 15 years old. And by then he had learned Dutch, he had learned French from living in Belgium, and then his father was now teaching him English at the time that the Germans invaded Holland. And up until that point, the members of your family living in Amsterdam, who lived in the house with you?
My father, my mother, and my sister, and me.
And how much older were you from your sister?
My sister was born in she was born a year and a half later than I. So I was a year and a half older.
Yeah. And so you, at the time when you were 15, she was 13 and a half.
Yeah.
And the Jews, like all over Europe, the Nazis made the Jews wear stars.
Well, that came later in 1942, when the strong edicts came out against the Jews, and we had to wear a yellow star in the middle of which was written the word Jew in Hebrew, but in Dutch letters.
And you wore that on your left?
You had the word on your left breast, on all your outer garments.
So everywhere from that time forward, you had to be marked that you were a Jew, but you were still allowed to move around Amsterdam for a period of time.
Until 8 o'clock at night.
And then you had to be in your house.
Then you had to stay in the house.
And then your sister, you and your sister, were you done with school at that point? Were you still going to school, or were you?
When I was 15, I didn't have to be in school. In Holland, you quit school at 13, then you could go to work. And I believe in Antwerp it was 14.
So that's why your sister had a job in a factory?
Yeah.
And she was allowed to go and come back to home with her star on?
She had a pass that she was working for the German army.
Until your sister was about 13 and a half, at which point, oh no, I'm sorry. Your sister was she was 16 years old.
She was 15 years old, and she was celebrating her 16th birthday in December of 1943.
And right around that...
December 40... Stop. 9...
Was it 44? No, 43. I thought you were right. 2 years.
She was, yeah. She became 43 in... She became
16.
16 that in around 43.
Okay. I think all we have to do is say it was around 1943 when they took her.
She was taken in December.
Okay, hold on just a minute. So don't tell that story part yet. So we'll back up a little bit, David, as you edit this. And so we were talking about wearing the Jewish stars. And
that was in May 42.
And you were saying that in May of 42, you had to start wearing the stars?
Yeah.
And your sister was 15 years old and she had a job in a factory.
Yeah.
And on her way home from from the factory, she was one of the first groups.
They took all the women on that floor. All of them were loaded in buses and taken to the train station. Then put on the train to Westerbork, which was the transit camp before you were taken to Auschwitz.
And this was pretty shocking to the family, to everybody, because up until then, as long as you had the Jewish star on, you could move around town until 8 o'clock. But now this was the first time that they just came in and just basically stole people from their lives out of the factory. Hers was one of the very first.
They didn't even wait until the end of the day. They actually, from what we heard, they were taken at mid-afternoon.
And loaded on trains, and off they went. Family was to never see them again for the most part.
Never did.
And your mother and father, of course, and yourself heard about this, and your mother...
My mother threw a fit, and in the sense that his mother would, and threatened to throw herself out of the window. We lived on the second floor. And my father, when he heard about it all, stopped working that afternoon, ran, and you have to cross the river in a boat and to get on the boat and get home. And, embraced Mom. I wasn't there, but I was told later on. And they went to screaming session.
Right.
I want to kill myself. I don't want to. You'll never see me again. And so,
if you could imagine, who's listening, if you're children or adults, Dad and his family were part of a very active community.
She was how old?
I was just saying, you and your family were part of a very active community in Amsterdam that lived in a very close, friendly kind of way. There were no TVs, there were no cars, there were not refrigerators, there was no computers, so people talked and they were together and they were happy.
There were no telephones privately.
Weren't even telephones. And so people spent a lot of time together. So what a shock it was to all of a sudden have part of your family is just taken away from you with no warning at all. And that really kicked off a desperation in your family where your parents now were very worried about you.
Me. And my father at first didn't know what to do. And when he had calmed down, he realized I should not go that faint. And so he began to start working in the black market. And he made contact with a farmer in Diemen, outside of Amsterdam. And he would buy whole rounds of cheese, put them in the side saddles and one on the back seat, and came home and then took him upstairs. And he had told my mom to gather as many newspapers as she could, because these cheeses had to be turned every day or every week, and put them in a closet and then turn them out so that the fat of the cheeses would be equal to the cheese. And then he would go out and sell them on the black market based on not slices, but a piece.
So the reason for this was your dad went into the black market to try to make extra money. I'm guessing because he needed the extra money to try to pay to help put you into hiding?
Yeah, he had to amass them. So he had also begun to buy collections of foreign stamps, because he had been led to believe that it was a very, very lucrative thing, and that there were very many stamp collectors.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there. These are the details that they don't have time for.
I know, I understand.
So let me go back and say, let's just go back, David, as you edit this, to when we were talking about your family came together and they were really worried about you, and your dad arranged for you to, so let's just start there. Talk about him arranging you to go into hiding, okay? So we're just going to start.
The following day.
Okay, wait a minute. We just said your parents were worried about you. And so what did your parents arrange to try to avoid having you be taken away on the train?
They were very much concerned. And so when he went to the factory again, he made an announcement to the guys, the fellow workers, that he would like to be brought into contact with the underground.
And if I can just say, the underground is a group of people who got together to arrange secretly to try to help Jews or anyone else who was in harm's way from the Nazis, because they didn't just take Jews, they also took people who were gay, some political prisoners, people with disabilities. And so the underground worked to try to save the lives of people that the Nazis were trying to find. So your dad went to his job, which was at a diamond polishing factory.
And so the next morning after that, one of the guys came up to him and said, "We'll take him." And he was wearing a star, but he was married to a Christian woman who didn't have to wear a star. And he had a son about my age at that time. So it all fit together nicely. And he said to my father that's what my father told me, we take him. I've discussed it with my wife and my kids, and they have agreed. And there was only the youngster was at home. The two.
Okay, so let me just jump in and say, many of you have heard of Anne Frank going into hiding, and that was in the same town, Amsterdam, Holland. And so now my grandfather, who I never got to meet, had arranged with a coworker that Dad could go into hiding in their home because, as Dad just mentioned, the mother was not Jewish and she could walk around town without having to wear a patch. And so Dad, when you were how old at this point?
I was about 16.
And so you went into hiding.
And I became 17 when I was arrested.
Okay, so before you were arrested, you went into hiding. And so tell people what that was like.
Well, hiding, you're not allowed to be near any window. You do not wear shoes, you wear socks or slippers. And I didn't have slippers, so I wore socks. And if she had to go out shopping, you would find yourself a seat on the couch and found some reading material, and would not use the toilet unless it became an urgent matter that you could go to the toilet, but you were not allowed to flush the water. Under no circumstances would you run the water in the sink. And so it was a very tight, knitted 2 hours, so to speak.
And you're also told, don't go to the window, don't look out.
I said that a while ago.
And the reason being that if anybody knew you were in hiding in this house, in this apartment, they would turn you in, and the Nazis would pay Dutch citizens the equivalent of about $25 to be able to, if the Dutch citizens informed on where somebody was in hiding, they would get paid for that, and then the Nazis would come to try to find that person. And think about that. That would be you being paid to sell somebody's life to someone that was going to torture or make them into a slave or kill them. And so you're in hiding. Your parents knew, even though they thought that you needed to be a diamond polisher because that's what you did in the family, your parents knew you wanted to become an architect. And so when they
And they
arranged
rooted in Antwerp.
when they arranged for you to go into hiding, they actually had a number of books that they gave you.
No, before we went to hiding, because we couldn't go out in the street after 8 o'clock, my mom and dad decided, and that I was so adamant when I was 14, I wanted to be an architect, they decided to engage a mail order type of organization with books like that, so that when you could study at home, and they had questions and answers, and they would correct them.
Okay, so those books went with you into hiding.
Yeah.
So when you had to sit on the couch for a number of hours, you started reading these books a lot, which is important because information in those books later helped to save your life. So we're going to come back to that. And then how did you get found out? How did someone find out that you were in hiding? Because unfortunately, you didn't get to stay in hiding. How long were you in hiding for?
Well, I was picked up, and I believe it was December.
It's okay.
December 47.
No, the couldn't have been 47.
What do you mean?
Because 47, the war was already over. The war ended in 45. So
47 of 44.
Yeah, so you were picked up in, was it 1943?
I had just turned. Yeah, I was picked up.
You had just turned 19.
Yeah, no.
No.
Yeah, I just turned 19.
Okay, so 43. So David can slice that. So you were picked up. How long? Let me just ask that question again. Just how long were you in hiding for?
About a little bit more than half a year.
Okay, and then you were picked up by the Nazis in December of, or they tried to find you in December of 1943.
Yep.
So how did they find out that you were in hiding?
There must have been someone who tipped them off.
All right, so hold on just a minute. Remember the story of your love letter?
Ah, yeah, okay.
That was it.
Yeah.
And the man at the dinner.
Okay, when I was in
Okay, so hold on. Just give it a clean break for David to edit. So let me try it again. So how did they find out you were in hiding?
Well, in the summer when I had turned 17, I had gone on my bicycle.
Okay, hold on. There's just too many details. You just need to say that there was a girl you really liked, and that you wrote a letter to her, because we want to send the minutes talking about the camps.
When I was in the Veluwe, which was an area for recreation, I'd gone there on my bike. We didn't have the word stars yet. And I fell in love, I thought, with a young woman. And in our talks, which was, well, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I said, I am going to become an architect. And they all said, wow, that's good, ambitious. And I asked the girl I was interested in, and what are you going to be? I'm going to be a pharmacist, she said. And it so turned out later on, I found out I became an architect, and she never did. She got married to an Italian, and they started making children clothing.
Okay, and so you really liked this woman, and then you're now in hiding, and you want to write her a letter.
So every night, a guy came to the place where I was hidden, and he was in a black coat and a black hat, never said a word, sat down at his place, ate a meal, and got out. And on that day, I had completed a letter to her, and stupidly I had given the address where I was hidden, not even thinking. And I put it in his coat pocket and said, please mail these for me. And that night he was picked up. And they went through his pockets, found the letter, and they came looking for me. And they said, where's Max Garcia? There is no such person here. And so they went to the roof, and I had been told by the son, who had just by chance looked out of the window, saw that the car arrive with those clowns in it, and told me, shouted, Max, get to the roof fast. Went to the roof fast and hid behind one of the skylights at the far end of the roof. They came looking for me with their flashlights, didn't find me, and then left. When they had left, the wife had made a satchel ready for me with some clothes in it and false credit cards and my identity, and then flushed it in my ear where I was to go. That was a safe house. And when she said that, I said, oh, I know that place, because my father had been on the building committee of the neighborhood. And so I went over there. When I got there in the evening, no more stars, and I had a little briefcase. And he said, are you the son of Ailey? He said, yes. Yeah, come on in. So we opened the door, let me in, and we went to one of his rooms, and he started, what happened? And I told him just what I told you. And he says, okay, go find a couch, go to sleep, we'll talk after breakfast. And then after breakfast, I had very little sleep that night. I said to him, I know where the keys are to a facility that my aunt and her husband has on the Van Wouwstraat, and I know where the key is and where I can get it. They had already been picked up. And so I went to get the key, opened the place, and went in. Then went out and get some supplies to eat, to drink.
Hey, Dad, this is too many details because we're trying to get to you getting arrested. So let me just ask this question for you. After the man let you in, how long were you in hiding in this before you were arrested?
I was in hiding.
The second time.
I was in hiding there when I had my 17th or 18th birthday, when I was in hiding.
The
19th birthday.
The 19th birthday in hiding. Was that the one that your parents brought you the cake for?
The cake and some gifts.
Okay. And then after you got out of that, because that happened when you were living in the apartment before the Nazis came. Once the Nazis came and you ran over to the second hiding place, how long were you trying to be in hiding before the Nazis came to get you?
About a week and a half.
Okay. So you were not there very long before.
No. After they have knocked on the door, Max Garcia, you're inside, we know where you are, come out. And I would not answer the front door. And then they began to threaten that they would kick the door in. I finally said, well, it's over with. So I came out.
Oh, okay. And at that point, you are arrested and taken.
I was taken to police headquarters of Amsterdam, put upstairs, and that's being interrogated. All they were interested in finding out is who had made the false document. Give us the name. They said, my documents I got from City Hall. No, that's not. They were very good, by the way, but they knew that they were false. And so I got some hits from some of the cops there, and I was put in a cell.
So you were beat up for the first time?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question that I've never asked you. When you were in hiding in the apartment for that period of time, how did you feel? Like, how did you do that with your emotions in order, being taken away from your family and having no idea what was happening? How did that feel?
It feels rotten.
Yeah.
But you learn one thing of survival is to adjust to the conditions that you have to meet. And I did that very well, except for that stupid letter.
Yeah.
And so the next morning, they took me to the Plantage Middelaan, which was a very important street, and there was a Jewish theater on there.
So after you were arrested and beat up, they took you over to the Jewish theater that they have now changed. It's no longer a Jewish theater.
It's a assembling point.
Where they brought all the Jews they were arresting to hold them.
Yeah. And then I was called upstairs to the SS. They started asking me questions, same hits, but the hits were a whole lot stronger than the Dutch. And when I came downstairs, I just sat down and just cried and cried and cried. And some women came over and caressed me. It's okay, Max. Let it go, let it rip. We'll try to console you. And then finally I stopped.
So I'm going to just say, so this was after your second beating. You really are realizing you're arrested, you're in the theater, and you're just crying. And all these other people who also had been arrested.
And they're waiting the same lot.
Still came to you to try to make you feel better.
Yeah.
And no one knew what was happening next.
And nor where we were going, but we had ideas.
So what did happen next?
Next thing was that a few days later, a train or a bus was stopped by to take us to the railway station, and then we were taken on the train to move to Westerbork, which was in the portion northeast of Holland. And I was locked up in the barracks because I had been in hiding and they had arrested me, so I need punishment.
Oh.
So I was put into a punishment barracks.
So this was kind of like a jail?
Yeah.
How long were you in there for?
About a week, I think.
Okay.
And then said, get yourself ready, you're going to go on a ride. And so I was taken to the train, and I was very amazed because there were no windows, just freight cars. And we put in there.
No windows, no chairs,
what?
No seats.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Just straw on the door.
Straw. And where did what about toilets?
Well, in the middle of the thing stood an empty metal vat with planks on. And that's where you did your necessary things like your peeing and your pooping.
So in the middle of this freight car, and how many people were in each freight car?
About 50.
50,
50 years older, that or older.
Or 50 people.
Yeah.
And they're in one car with no windows. It's very dark. And you're pushed all in together, nowhere to sit. You don't know these people.
What you did was, there was straw on the floor. And so you found yourself a niche and sat down because there was nothing else to do. You could never walk about.
But then you would have to go to the bathroom in the front of all these people you didn't know.
But like there were older people. Here I'm a teenager.
Yeah.
And people in their 50s and their 60s and 70s, they had to be hoisted up by their husbands or other to sit down and do their thing. And, you don't realize how embarrassing that is at the time.
Sure. Well, certainly they must have been feeding you food. They must have brought you fancy meals?
No meals on the 3 days that we were in that train.
No water?
No water. Whatever you had in your pockets and there were no glass things, no plastic. You had these canteens and that sort of thing.
So if you happened to have water with you, if you happened to have food, that was it. That's all you had for 3 days. And people must have been crying and miserable.
It's indescribable. I mean, 50 people, half of more are older people. Remember, I'm now 19. I'm young.
Yeah.
And I've never been on my own.
Yeah. It's very scary.
And so I have to poop and pee too.
Mhm.
But I climb on the little steps that there are to get on. And then in the middle of the night, it would stop at some station, prearranged, and then two men were assigned to pick up that thing, take it to the platform, empty it, and bring it back in. And then we went on, and at 4 o'clock that a morning,
How many days do you think you were on the train
I
for?
have no idea. How do you know? You can't tell. It's all dark. in
Yeah,
there.
but it felt like a long time.
It was when we found out it was 4 days riding that
Oh,
we had.
okay.
And so when we came to my Auschwitz at 4:30, I think it was, the lights suddenly went up all around the car. The doors were all slammed open at the same time. And awaiting us were fellows prisoners in striped jackets and a striped hat, talking in either German or in Yiddish. And we were from Amsterdam. Nobody spoke Yiddish in Amsterdam. Nobody spoke German. They spoke Dutch. And so until it sank into them, the prisoners and the SS, that we were not joking here, they found a way to communicate, which was all the women on the other side of the track with the children.
So on the train, you were on the train with women and children, or were you
Yeah.
on a train
The
with
women
everybody?
were with the men.
On the train?
Yeah.
And then when the train arrived, nobody really knew they were in Auschwitz. They'd never really heard of that before.
That's right. So the doors went open on both sides. The women went out on that side and on the left side.
So they pointed them into two different directions.
Yeah, and the men, not to the same direction. And then the men were on the other side. And lined up at 5 in a row. And so then they were given instruction that the dogs were barking and the SS was shouting. It was a fantasy almost.
But not in a good fantasy. It was.
Well, you know that something was happening to you, but you didn't know what the hell it was.
You couldn't make sense of it. You just were doing what you were told.
Yeah, that's it. And so I finally came to the table. He looked at me.
Well, let's slow down there a little bit, because you worked forward in these lines to a table where somebody was sitting. Two people sat, and they looked at you, each one at a time, and they gave you directions to go to the left
or to the right.
or to the right.
And I believe if it was to the left, you were saved. If you were right, you went towards where the women were, and because they were selected in a different way, because they were looking for younger women, as we also found out later.
So the men, if they went left, they didn't know it at the time, but that meant that they would get to live and now have to live as a prisoner. If you went to the right, you were basically getting in line for the gas chambers to die.
But you didn't know that.
Right. But that was what selection was about, that someone tells you one way or the other.
The men who were married with children, they saw their wife and the kids just disappear. They didn't even have a chance to go over and kiss them.
And one of the things you did in the camps, which helped you to survive, is you became smart. You noticed these patterns.
No.
No, wait a minute.
It was the guy who came out of the sky.
No, wait a minute. I'm just trying to make a point for the children that, let me talk here for a minute and don't tell me no, that after you went through this selection, you began to realize later what was going on. And over the 2 years you were in camp systems, you had to go through other selections. But now you understood each time you went through a selection, no matter how bad you felt, you had to stand up and look really good to make sure that they always selected you. Because living in the camps required you to get smart about what was going on around you.
But what the man, when I was sitting there on the grass, had pouring rain out of my eyes.
So we're not quite ready for that story.
Huh?
That you're not quite ready for that story. Because now you're talking about the man who did a good thing for you?
Yeah.
So now we're talking about you're just getting through the selection, and the next thing that happens is...
You're taken to a block.
That's what we want to talk about now. Yeah.
And
So let me just put that a question to you. So after you went to the left, then what happened to you next once you were living?
We put on the trucks with all the other guys and taken to a barracks. And we went upstairs, and there they said, take off all your clothes. The only two things you can keep is your belt and your shoes. Everything else, watches, rings, all go in that corner with the rest of it. And that's it. And you sit there naked until we tell you what to do.
So, Dad, last week when you and I talked, you told this story, and a little girl came up to me afterwards, and she said, "Why did you get to keep your belt? Why was your belt important?"
We had no idea.
But why did you find out your belt was
Later,
important?
because that's the only thing that could hold your pants up.
Yeah. And what they knew was you were going to get very skinny in this camp, and you needed to have a belt to keep your pants up.
Yeah. And then all your hair was cut off. Up your hair.
Shaved off?
Huh?
Shaved?
Just a minute. Your hair was taken off under the arms all the way to your crotch. And then they were giving you a card on which to write your name, the address, where you came from, who you...
Well, hold on, Dad. After you get shaved, you get deloused. You go through the showers. Do you want to talk about that? Because normally you do here.
You go to the shower, and they turn it on, and having had the books that I are reading on architecture, I realized that I looked at the pattern of the lights above, supposedly, and I saw that they were staggered, and I realized that something is happening, and suddenly the water came down, and it was scalding hot, and they were trying to see who they could burn out of this.
Mm.
And then, before you went into the shower, all your hair was cut off with your head, under your armpits, in your crotch, and then you went into the shower. Then you came out, you were deloused, and they had big buckets of some sort of a chemical, and they, wherever your hair had been, they would now splat you with all that crap. And then you had, or they handed you a pair of trousers and a jacket and a cap, and that was it. You had your shoes, you had your belt, and you had your shoes. That was it.
That sounds right. And when they were delousing you with chemicals,
Why
did they do that?
Well, because presumably they did that so that no vermin can seek places up there.
The Nazis were very concerned about bringing all you guys together and then people getting an illness, and they lived in a group, so they wanted to remove any kind of something that could cause an infection.
And so when that was done, we had put our clothes on, and then we were walked over to an area, another barracks, and we were just tossed two on a bunk, two people next to each other, 4 bunks high. And there we spent the night, and we had no food until that time.
Mm.
And so we began to wonder.
Was it just one person on a bunk?
Two.
Oh, 2 people slept on the bunk, and the
No,
bunks...
Six people slept on the bunk. We got 3 layers.
There was 3 bunks high, 2 people. Were you on a mattress with a pillow?
Huh?
Did you sleep on a mattress with a pillow?
The mattress was straw. The pillows were not existing. There were no blankets. There was nothing.
And you were sleeping and living in your clothing they gave you?
Yeah.
Which was striped fabric.
Or old men's that were striped on the back.
Okay. And they wanted you, why did they want you in stripes?
Because you were a prisoner. And if a guard had a reason to shoot at you, he had a mark.
He could find you easily.
Yeah.
And did you have your number? Well, now you're going to tell us about getting your number.
While I was in the barracks upstairs there, and with the shoes at the end, at the belt, they gave us the cards, and on the card was a number printed, which is now tattooed on my left forearm.
You want to show us?
And
It's all right. We can cut the film right here.
that becomes my new name.
Okay, hold on, because we're going to cut the film while we're getting this. It's a sticky button. Let me just pull it back down. All right, so
And
if I say you want to show us, and
then I realized the number here that they had just tattooed was on the card. And then I began to realize that I was a prisoner. Because now by this time it's dark. You know, the whole day has gone by with all this crap, and now you had no meal, and all the older men who had been married, they were all on one side, and they were all commiserating with each other about their wives and their children. So I was sitting there on the grass on the outside the building, and I was pouring red tears. And somewhere a man or a youngster, perhaps my age, I have no idea, stopped in front of me and said, "Do you want to live?" And I said, "Yes." And I looked up and said, "Who is he?" And he said, "Okay, I'm going to teach you how you're going to help to live. You have your number on your arm, that is your new name. You have to remember that number in German and in Polish if you can. Dutch is not spoken here. So you learn to say 139, 829, and in Polish, after you've done in German, you do the next one is do it the same thing for in Polish, because the Poles really run this camp. So
because Auschwitz was in Poland.
Yeah, and so I learned from him to say 139, 829, 139 or 139, 829. And then he was gone. He said, "You keep this in your mind and you make it." And the other warning he gave me was also, don't go over there where all the Dutch are climbing next to that wall there. Said they will all be dead within a month. And I didn't even ask him, what do you mean by that?
So that's a story that's really powerful in your life, that this man came in, didn't know you, and offered you these words of wisdom. And basically his wisdom was, as much as you love your family, don't dwell on it. Take care of yourself today to live through the day every day, and don't stumble over what you miss. Just try to keep alive today.
And so then we were taken to Buna, and the Buna was the first work camp. And
Buna is very close to Auschwitz. They're all right next to each other.
They're not next to it, but they're within a few miles of each other. And what time is it?
We have about 15 minutes.
Done? Or but
we have 15 minutes to go.
And
you were saying Buna was the first work camp, a couple of miles from Auschwitz.
And we worked in the basement, and there was all water on the floor, and the water stood up to your half leg. And you did what you were told to do. I have no idea what I did down there.
So you had to walk through a lot of water.
And then one day I realized, and my job was to go up and then pick out two masonry blocks.
Heavy stone, heavy blocks.
Yeah, they're about this long and that high.
To build with.
Yeah, and they were to be taken up to the barracks where they were building the factory for IG Farben.
So did you go up a ladder, upstairs?
A ramp.
Up a ramp with these two heavy blocks.
And then you go down, and then you pick two more, and that's what you do all day long. And one day I woke up, and I realized that my middle finger on my right hand was swelling up and blowing. I was turning green and yellow. I went to a request to go to the clinic, and they told me to go ahead. I went over there. The doctor looked at it and said, to the side. And so there were some other people there. And then the truck came and took us back to Auschwitz main camp. And then we were taken to a barracks.
Can we talk about that for a minute? Because your finger got infected and it was really ugly.
I didn't know what it was.
Right.
They saw it at the gate when I got to the barrack. They knew what it was, and they immediately hit us, cleaned it up, and put some crap on it.
So one of the crazy things about the concentration camp system is they're killing a lot of people. Then they have people like you who are slaves and prisoners to do their work for them. And they really don't care if you die because they're killing a lot of people. But if you get sick, weirdly, they have a clinic for you to go to.
I wish you had been alive so you could have asked those questions.
I know, it's so weird. But you have this story you've told me that when your finger was infected, they had to drive you over to Auschwitz from Buna, and so they put you on a truck to take you there. Tell us about the truck.
Okay, when we were outside the clinic, and they told us off, took our clothes off, and then all of a sudden I realized when the trucks came, they were stacked with dead bodies, and they were stacked like wood.
Just on this truck, dead
and
bodies.
So they said, crawl it to the top and find yourself a hole.
And you're naked?
No, I don't think I was naked.
Oh, okay. So you did have your clothes.
Underclothes?
No, you do. You're still in your clothes.
Still in my clothes.
And you're on top of all these dead bodies.
Yeah.
Was this the first time you'd seen dead bodies?
Yeah.
Yeah, it must have been startling to have to sit on top of them.
You become so inane to
yeah.
it all.
Yeah.
You just, it's crazy. But you learn to adjust very rapidly to all new conditions.
So you and then a couple of other prisoners are now sitting on top of dead bodies?
Yeah. And then we were driven off. And I guess halfway there they stopped. And the driver and the assistant went into the nearest bar and had themselves a drink. And after a while they came out and they followed and took us to Auschwitz main camp.
Now just think about this. This is crazy. You're sitting on a lot of dead bodies. The driver stops to go have a beer with his person he's driving with while these other folks who feel sick need to get over to Auschwitz. It's just beyond...
We didn't know where we were going.
Yeah, it's just such a crazy scene in this whole story. And so you end up in Auschwitz at the clinic, at their hospital.
And we were let down at the barracks for severe sicknesses that need to be controlled. And again, all clothes were off. Again, we showered, and new fresh clothes were given. And
part of this is because the Nazis were so worried about a prisoner getting sick that would go viral and make all of the prisoners sick.
And the SS.
And the guards. So they were very careful about this.
Yeah. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and then I was released. And it was my first lucky break because now they didn't send me back to Buna. they kept me in Auschwitz main Stammlager.
So this is confusing to people because people think Auschwitz is the worst place to be, but actually in Buna, you did not have you were sleeping in tents outside, and it was very, very cold. So when you got put in Auschwitz, the good news about Auschwitz, if there's any good news, is that you now had your bunks were in a building where it was not quite as cold outside.
Yeah. And also now we got food
Ah,
because you got tea or coffee three times a day.
but the coffee wasn't anything like we drink.
I am making a facetious remark.
No, but the kids, they don't know who are watching this. The coffee and tea was like water.
Yeah, and it was all colored, and it all looked like in between.
Okay.
But in the morning it was very good because it was hot,
Mm.
and in the evening when you got it with the evening with the day's meal, you drank what you think you could absorb, so you didn't have to climb out of bed in the middle of the night.
Oh, okay. Because that was hard. And then for the meal itself, what did you eat?
Oh, you got a slice of bread, about 4 inches by 4 inches, and about that thick, and either a piece of margarine on top. That was it.
So your whole day, you would start at like 6 in the morning with a cup
It
of
starts at 4:30.
4:30 in the morning. You were woken up. And when you woke up, you got called to have to stand on your number outside.
You were allowed to run to the toilet. Then you had to line up, short people in front, all tall people up the back, and that was roll call. And so I was reasonably short, tall, or whatever. So I stood to the front, and you had no more than 10 people in a row, which is important because everything has to be done in a hurry. And
You stood out there whether it was snowing,
or rain,
raining,
or windy.
didn't matter. You're in there, you're just in your same striped fabric clothing.
You slept in your night clothing, which became your morning clothing.
You just slept in and wore these clothes all the time. And then they called your number out in the language of German or Polish. And you had to respond to your number.
If they were needed. But I mean, in the roll call in the morning, all they cared about was that the number that were in that block were the same number that were there the night before.
They wanted to make sure nobody escaped.
Yep.
And so you did that every morning, and then that was at like what you said, 5 o'clock in the morning.
It was about 4:30 because they allow you to get out of the bunk, get to the John, which was and that is something to behold. That's like the bookcase there, but except longer. It's about 12 holes, and in 2 rows, so it's 24 holes. And you can sit on the left at either side. There's no water, no flushing, no toilet paper, and you sit down, and if you have to shit, you go ahead and go away. If you have a leak on it, you do it, and you don't need a word to clean you off. I mean, it stops.
There's no toilet paper.
No toilet,
It must
not
have-
even newspapers.
Must have
Nothing.
stunk. Must have been so smelly.
You know, I don't remember that.
Yeah. If you all must have smelled. There was no showers.
Because, as I keep saying, you become adjusted
Yeah.
to all of it.
So you're in the morning, you have this early roll call. Then you get to have your hot tea or coffee. No food in the morning.
No, because you got it at night.
That's the only meal you get.
And then you got a meal at lunchtime.
Okay.
which
So
were like
so after they called you for roll call, now you had to go to report to a job.
Yeah.
Between breakfast and lunch.
But I mean, I was still not selected for a job. So I had to go to the special unit, and they were assigned with guards, and the electricity wire were all turned off, and we walked the entire around the camp, picking up papers, that had blown in
They're
there.
keeping it very clean.
And that was our job.
So you bring up a good point that you were not just in behind a fence, you're behind an electric fence.
Yeah.
That sometimes people,
Would run into and kill themselves. It was all high voltage.
so if you just had enough and you couldn't stand living as a prisoner, you just killed yourself in the fence. So that was, and ultimately you got assigned over the course of being a prisoner many different jobs.
Yeah.
But you'd have to always follow the schedule of early getting up, a cup of coffee and tea. Then
They
there
had to.
Then there was some lunch that was, what did
A
you,
bowl of soup.
bowl of soup that was mostly water.
It was soup. They called it soup, so I followed through. I call it soup.
But it's not soup I would want to eat.
It's all potato shield, and
The peels, potato peels.
potato peel, and maybe you find a piece of chicken in there if you're lucky, or some piece of meat, and then the piece of bread that you got the night before had to suffer through the lunchtime.
So
Because you
you
get
actually saved some of your bread from the night before.
If you learn to accept what you're missing and what you're not going to get, you learn to adapt. I keep saying this over and over again to people. If you want to survive something, learn to adapt.
Yeah.
And to learn to adapt very fast. And then my number was called out. So, oh my God, what does this mean? Well, it was a very good timing for me because I found out that I had been assigned to the Pakketstelle, which means it is the place where all packages come in.
I think we just jumped a piece. We're going to have to wrap up really soon. So let me do something with you. You just got an assignment. What actually you were, in this part of the story, you were assigned to go work up on in the carpentry job.
Yeah.
Not the Pakketstelle yet.
No.
And so when you had your assignment, you were a carpenter assigned to help on the rooftops when spring was coming?
Yeah, that was in springtime when I had started having breathing problems. And when I went to the clinic, they told me to every day come back, and they got a piece of paper that said I didn't have to go to work that day.
Okay, but wait, we have to wrap up here. So here's how I want to wrap up is you were just saying you got an assignment, and your assignment was that came much later. The Tischlerei, where you were doing the carpentry work.
Yeah.
But we never told them when you got your card, we never told them you wrote carpenter on it. So let's do that now. So you were saying that you got an assignment, and then tell them when you filled out your card that you wrote down the word carpenter because you had read all your architecture books.
When I was stark naked when we came into the camp, and we had to fill out the card, and at the bottom line was, what was your job? And I had written down carpenter, and I had never had a hammer or a nail in my hand at 19. But something in the back of my mind said, put down carpentry, because they have no use for diamond polishers here.
But you also told me that part of why you did that is you'd read all those architecture books in hiding, and what you learned from architecture is that you have to learn something about carpentry.
If you want to become an architect in Holland at that time, that's all has changed. Either carpentry or being a mason is very thing that would be good for you.
So you wrote carpenter down, they call you for an assignment, and you find out that you've been assigned to
the Tischlerei.
Which was?
And that's where we stood under a roofed building, metal building, with all electric running equipment. And we would take trees or half tree and slide them through machinery and make planks out of
that was one more of many assignments you had. But when you wrote down carpenter, now you got to be working in a building that had a roof. So when it was really cold, you were inside.
Because the equipment threw off heat.
Ah, that was good. And then
Yeah.
later, when the spring came, you got to work up on top of the roof in the sun to give you health.
And I could take the jacket up because neither guard nor capos were allowed to climb up.
And you had many things that ultimately helped keep you alive, between luck of getting sick once again and the Nazis agreeing to do surgery on you as a medical experiment, and then you meeting another person who helped you to get a better assignment in the camps, helped you to survive a death march into Austria, where ultimately you were in 3 more concentration camps before you were liberated by the American Army on May
6th, a Sunday,
1945,
45.
which to my father is like the second birthday in his life. And my dad is written with my mother, who was a writer. My dad told his story to Mom, who wrote this beautiful book. And the name of your book is
Auschwitz, Auschwitz, I cannot forget you.
And you'll see that on the screen behind us. And if you, that book is still available to you. And Dad, thank you so much for taking the time to explain your story to school-age kids. If it was in a more of adult audience, we have a much bigger story to tell.
No, I'm glad to do it so that people understand that it isn't just Auschwitz, it is much deeper.
Yeah. And so if you want to tell kids, like you've been saying, one of your lessons was constantly learn how to adapt. And another one had to do with always hope that something better is going to happen in the future.
Yeah, always look at the good side. The dead side is all around you, so you can't change it. But the good signs, if you react to that, there is hope for you that you can survive.
You told me it was easy to die, it was hard to live.
Yeah, because there was all the electrical fences. You could run into it and bing, it was over with.
But to choose to live meant you had to live for hope, and that you were going to find ways to make every day as good as it can.
You knew in your heart that the Germans going to get licked. When it was going to happen, nobody knew. Your job was to stay alive until it would happen. That meant fighting in your own way against the Germans. That's all.
And now you're 95, and
almost.
You tell me that you want to live to at least 100 because you want to outlive
all the goddamn Nazis who made my life miserable.
And yet you've outlived the camps, and you've actually had a pretty good life.
Yeah, I've had a very good life. I became an architect. I had my own office. When I retired, I had 23 people in my office working. The whole community of mine was 24, which was me included. And everybody in the office in San Francisco. You have had 23 people in your office? Yes, I did. And that would be very prominent offices. And that's remarkable. How did you do it? I said, I have no idea, but sticking with it.
And so then you went on, you had 3 kids, and then two of your daughters had 5 children, and then your daughters have partnered with new partners, and there's 5 more children, and so you have
10 children.
You have 10 grandchildren who look up to you and will learn from your story.
Wait, let's go back. I have
you have our 5, and then you have their 5 from Pam's side, who are all part of your story as well.
In that sense.
Yes.
Okay, I'd never seen those before.
Well, you're meeting them here.
Yeah.
Right. But it'll be nice for them to hear that. So if we just say you have 5 kids and then 10 grandchildren who all look up to you.
Thank God they don't get money every year.
None of your grandchildren do.
They do get.
All right. Thanks, Dad.
You're welcome.